For a new version of his book, renowned royal author Tom Bower will provide significant details about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's marriage. Tom Bower recently discovered something that no one was meant to discover about Harry's and Meghan's marriage. A single phrase that might destroy Harry's entire existence is buried on page 14 of a legal contract he signed in 2020. His reputation was ruined, his brand vanished, he had a strained relationship with his kids, and his financial future was totally lost. The fact that Harry signed this contract without reading a word of it during one of the most emotionally turbulent times in his life makes it even more repulsive. Since 2022, that one blind signature has been discreetly transferring funds in the background. Tom Bower is now yelling a single warning at the top of his lungs. Harry must get ready to lose everything. The Too Knowledgeable Man. One of the most incendiary novels ever published about the British royal family was created over many years by Tom Bower. Revenge exploded when it hit the stores. Meghan Markle was accused by Revenge of methodically damaging Harry's ties with his family, controlling palace employees, and waging a brutal campaign to change her personal image while ruining the reputations of those who opposed her. The book was intense, thorough, and well-sourced. Additionally, the response it elicited from Meghan's camp was so planned, forceful, and frantic that it left Bower wondering. What more was out there that no one had yet discovered if the first book was this harmful? So he returned. Bower found 80 people who had first-hand knowledge of Meghan's personal life and posed a single, straightforward inquiry to them. In reality, what did you see? Behind the cameras, who is Meghan? What they revealed to him in interview after interview was a picture of calculating so cold and consistent that it nearly seemed implausible. 3 stories that altered everything were hidden among those 80 interviews. The first originated from former palace employees who had close access to the Sussex household. They did not describe a demanding employer or a challenging boss. Several of them spoke to Bower using nearly the same words because the control mechanism was so intentional and reliable. Meghan did more than just run the household, even though they had never talked to one another. Every bit of information that got to Harry was under her control. His family's messages, his oldest friend's correspondence, and staff members' concerns were all filtered by her. Bower was explicitly informed by a former assistant that Harry lived in a reality that Meghan created and maintained for him on a daily basis. Harry was ready to dismiss any alternative account of events by the time anyone outside of that bubble attempted to contact him. Employees who voiced internal concerns did not receive formal reviews or warnings. Several former employees said that the pace at which they were dismissed from their jobs was unprecedented. Professionals in Hollywood who collaborated with Meghan provided the second account. Without ever communicating with one another, other sources reported the same pattern. When a collaborator's usefulness ended, she would cut them off after developing an extremely tight working relationship and projecting a sense of loyalty. Meghan's connection with professional loyalty was so transactional that it would eventually result in catastrophic consequences, according to a formal internal warning filed by a top production figure. According to Bower, the third finding is the most important of the 80 interviews. Separate financial structures were reportedly being contemplated internally as early as 2019, according to a legal expert who had direct first-hand knowledge of the Sussex financial arrangements. Arrangements that would allow Meghan to independently manage the money made by the Sussex brand. Not until the marriage started to show signs of disintegration in public in 2022. Not after Meghan, when the hardship of starting over in California was evident. That was back in 2019. The pair remained members of the royal family. Behind the scenes, the financial departure architecture was already being planned and implemented while the love story was still being performed in front of the cameras. Tom Bower, a former lawyer and investigative journalist for the BBC, has over 40 years of experience pursuing influential people who thought they were untouchable. He uncovered media magnate Robert Maxwell, who, while concealed behind an army of attorneys, embezzled hundreds of millions from the pension funds of his own employees. He entered Mohammed Al Fayed's commercial empire and uncovered what Al Fayed had spent a great deal of money concealing. From within, he destroyed Simon Cowell's business. Bower doesn't publish on a whim. He constructs cases utilizing documents, timetables, and several sources that are cross-referenced against one another until the fissures split wide open, just like he did when he was a practicing attorney. For this reason, One of the most illuminating aspects of this whole tale is the reaction his first book provoked. Before a single copy of the book could be seen by anyone, Meghan's legal team requested a formal injunction. That injunction was totally unsuccessful. After that, her team formally complained in writing to 3 of Bauer's sources, claiming that their involvement went against confidentiality agreements. 2 of the 3 sources immediately fell silent. The pressure extended well beyond official letters, but the 3rd refused to concede. According to sources, they were frequently called by people they thought were speaking for Meghan directly. They were informed in straightforward terms that continuing to work with Bauer would cost them far more than any book was worth, and they were reminded of the non-disclosure agreements they had signed years before. According to one insider, Bauer's crew felt less like they were going through a judicial procedure and more like they were being shown how much of their lives could be ruined if they continued to speak. Nevertheless, Bauer published. He took in every attack, saw 2 sources crumble under the strain, and continued to write. You can tell how strong he thinks this new information is by the fact that he has returned for a 2nd edition, knowing exactly what is in store for him. Because what he discovered this time is hidden on page 14 of a 2020 agreement that Harry signed. And it's the piece that, at last, makes sense of everything else. However, you have to go much further back to Meghan's first marriage before Harry ever entered the scene in order to understand why that clause exists. Why Meghan knew exactly what language to put in it, and when to put it in front of Harry. Meghan had previously done this. Meghan's ex-husband, Trevor Engelson, is hardly remembered by most people. When Meghan was still a struggling actress attempting to establish herself in the business, he, a Hollywood television producer, met her. After years of dating, they married in Jamaica in 2011 in front of their closest friends. Then, citing irreconcilable differences, Meghan filed for divorce 2 years later. It was all calm, tidy, and over so quickly that it hardly seemed like news. However, what transpired within that settlement provides nearly all the information you need to understand what happened next. The attorneys on Trevor's side were unprepared for what they encountered when Meghan met with her legal team to arrange their separation. She hadn't brought a single attorney with her. Meghan had entered with a group of people. Before the first meeting, she had read every word in every document. Every element that did not directly support her long-term financial freedom was challenged by her. The particular financial arrangement within the divorce, which Meghan later adopted as a direct pattern, is something that hardly anyone has recorded. People who know Engelson personally said that Meghan's team included a clause to the contract that granted her complete ownership of any future profits from initiatives she had created during the marriage, even if those projects had not yet produced revenue at the time of the divorce. Only months after the divorce was finalized did Engelson understand that this condition had excluded him from a number of projects that he had actively contributed to. According to Bauer's sources, he told a close friend about the experience of opening a door he believed led to one area only to discover it headed somewhere else. The 2020 prenuptial agreement Meghan eventually persuaded Harry to sign is nearly identical in its structural reasoning and forward ownership over future income possibilities. She never forgot the lesson she learned from her first marriage. Above all, safeguard your earning potential. Leave with nothing that connects you to the choices made by others. A total vacation that gives you entire autonomy and control over your future. During that divorce, Meghan also discovered something much darker. The outcome is determined by the person in charge of the narrative. Her own acquaintances found it unnerving how precisely she handled the framing of her breakup with Trevor when it became public. Trevor wasn't shown as a bad guy. He was just deleted. In less than a year, the majority of those who followed her career were unable to identify him. He wasn't destroyed by Meghan. She rendered him obsolete. This same pattern applies to her estrangement from her father, Thomas Markle, which is more sinister than the official narrative. The fact that Meghan's legal team sent Thomas Markle a formal written communication in the months prior to the royal wedding informing him that any media contact or public statement would be viewed as a breach of a confidentiality agreement he had purportedly agreed to has never been fully reported. Although Thomas Markle has publicly stated that he never signed any such arrangement, the presence of that legal correspondence, which was revealed by a source close to the Markle family, implies that legal neutralization measures were being taken before he had even done anything harmful to the public. Just like Trevor Engelson had been eliminated years before, a man with press connections and an erratic personality was neutralized prior to the wedding and removed from Meghan's story. Around this same time, Bauer's team discovered something that completely changed the chronology of what came next. Meghan started dating Harry in 2016, but she didn't wait to see how things were going before taking action. Neither months into the relationship nor after the engagement did she hire Sunshine Sachs. Additionally, you don't hire Sunshine Sachs because you're thrilled about a new romance. The company's reputation has been established on its ability to handle a very particular type of business, high-stakes separations, and crisis management. During some of the most turbulent and stressful times in their lives, they are renowned for defending celebrity brands. When Katie Holmes left Tom Cruise, they were in charge of her. A woman is not considering the honeymoon when she engages such a service on the first day of a new relationship with a prince. The departure is on her mind. Meghan Markle had been using the same strategy for years by the time Prince Harry put the engagement ring on her finger. She continued to earn her own money, developed a self-sufficient identity, and made independent financial arrangements. In addition, she had a crisis management company on retainer and a habit of terminating relationships as soon as they became problematic, a tactic that had always protected her. None of this was known to Harry. He was stunned, devastated, and certain that he had at last found the one person who really understood him. He was unaware that the woman next to him had already started planning the exit's layout. The foundation for everything that came after had already been established by the time the wedding was over and the cameras had left. However, since royal prenuptial agreements are very different from what most people have seen, you must first understand how they operate in order to comprehend what Harry signed in 2020. Clause 7 on page 14. A typical prenuptial agreement is not very complicated. It outlines each partner's contributions to the union and describes how joint assets would be split in the event of a divorce. Royal prenuptial agreements, however, function on a completely different level. They are intended to safeguard assets that belong to the crown rather than the couple. They include specific guidelines for public conduct and what can and cannot be stated about the family in the media, as well as properties held in trust for future generations and regulations regarding the use of royal titles following a separation. These documents are not informal. They are legal frameworks created to manage reputation, resources, and long-term results for many years. The initial prenuptial agreement that Harry and Meghan signed prior to their 2018 wedding was designed to handle the conflict between California law and the royal framework. Anything earned during a marriage is regarded as jointly owned by both spouses under California's community property laws. This covers revenue from brands, streaming agreements, media contracts, and any business ventures started after the wedding date. The 2020 addendum destroyed all of Harry's perceived protections, notwithstanding the initial prenuptial agreement's attempts to establish limits. The precise window in which Harry signed the amendment is something that hardly anyone has mentioned. Within days of the official announcement that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were retiring from royal duties, the memo was presented to Harry, according to a source with first-hand knowledge of the timetable. At that moment, Harry was coping with a simultaneous breakdown of his royal identity, a public breakup with his brother, the loss of his security detail, and the horrifying realization that, for the first time in his life, he had neither a job nor a defined position. According to mental health experts who have examined his public remarks, this time was marked by severe psychiatric crises. His media cases in the UK took up nearly all of his legal team's attention at the time. The particular ramifications of prenuptial amendments under California law were less familiar to his California attorney. He was shown the change as regular documentation that reflected their new commercial endeavors. Harry signed it since he had total faith in Meghan. However, he was unaware of what he had just revealed. On page 14 of that modification, Harry signed a section pertaining to intellectual property. A wide variety of things fall under the umbrella of intellectual property. It consists of trademarks, logos, and brand names. It covers the rights to narratives, literature, and media. The right to make money out of someone's name and likeness is part of it. It even encompasses income sources associated with any content centered around an individual's public persona. This clause did not just split those items equally. Meghan was granted majority control of the Sussex brand, their joint companies, their media output, and the profits from Harry's memoir, Spare, according to Bauer sources. According to California law, she has the strongest legal position in any financial dispute because she was named as the business manager for all of their joint ventures. However, Bauer refers to one aspect of this clause as the agreement's true knife. It covers more than just current joint ventures. It includes forward-looking terminology that encompasses any project that is built in the future using resources, connections, or platforms that were created during the marriage. In practical terms, this means that Meghan would have a legal claim to a portion of Harry's earnings even if he were to walk away tomorrow, start a completely new business, and build something entirely new that drew in any way from his royal background, his Invictus platform, his public persona as a Sussex, or any relationships formed during the marriage. It's more than just a divorce clause. There is no expiration date on this financial leash. In a legal sense, she may have significant control over both Harry's birth name and his actual life. Bauer also determined the origin of the language. This modification was drafted with input from the same attorneys who handled Meghan's divorce from Trevor Engelson. They had witnessed her work before. They were already aware of her priorities. Together, they created a clause that devastatingly accurately mirrored the lesson Meghan had learned from her previous marriage and had been waiting years to use at scale. At the darkest hour of his life, with practically no one he could trust and no independent legal voice telling him to stop, Harry signed it. She requested him to sign, so he did. And the trap had fully closed by the time the ink dried. Everything was altered by the phrase alone. On paper, however, the phrase is only significant if the surrounding financial structure is designed to complement it. Meghan was back in California, quietly and methodically constructing an empire that was built from the ground up to survive the dissolution of the marriage and leave him with nearly nothing, while Harry was publicly disintegrating over the ensuing years, fighting court cases in London and sobbing in front of judges. The empire she established on her own. Something had changed between Harry and Meghan by 2022. Even if they couldn't identify it, anyone who was paying close enough attention could sense it. Meghan ceased going to events with Harry unless it was mandated by a contract. Joint interviews stopped happening. The cohesive public face started to fall apart. Additionally, Meghan was doing something far more deliberate while the media focused on conjecturing about marital discord. She was organizing documents. The first to appear was American Riviera Orchard. There was no mention of Harry in the trademark application for a lifestyle brand that was submitted in her name alone. No shared filing, no joint ownership. Then came the podcast agreement with Lemon Media. Once more, she was designated as the sole proprietor in the building. The Bench, the family book, was created without any financial ties to Harry. During this time, Meghan developed a number of business structures, all of which told the same tale. She and Harry were not creating a common future. She was constructing her own stronghold. The precise method that Bauer's sources claim was employed to transfer funds from jointly held entities into Meghan's individual accounts at this time has almost gone unreported. A financial advisor who spoke with Bauer claimed that the process entailed setting up what are referred to as single-member LLCs in California. A limited liability corporation that is only owned by one individual and is regarded as legally distinct from any marital estate is known as a single-member LLC. During this time, Meghan apparently created several of these organizations, each of which had distinct assets or sources of income. Income that is directed into a single-member LLC prior to being moved to a joint account may be argued to retain the independent property of the LLC's sole owner under California law. At least 5 of these businesses were created in Meghan's name alone between 2022 and 2024, according to Bauer's sources. None of them mention Harry. The most transparent insight into the real flow of funds is provided by the Netflix transaction. Declared to be worth $100 million. Payment was never assured. Bauer was informed by entertainment insiders that the $100 million was the most amount that could be paid out if all of the contracted content was delivered. While Meghan's cooking show and the documentary series were created, Pearl, the animated series, was cancelled before it aired, and a number of other contracted projects never came to be. Bauer's sources claim that the real sum obtained prior to Netflix downgrading the deal was roughly $40 million. Bauer questioned his sources on the movement of the $40 million. The $38 million debt figure associated with Sussexes' finances is not what it seems. When most people saw that figure, they imagined careless expenditure, but Bauer's financial sources revealed much more deliberate spending. A large amount of that debt is set up such that the liabilities appear to be jointly held, but Harry bears a greater part of the actual financial burden. Personal assurances are part of the procedure. California courts consider who benefited economically from a couple's co-signing debt. Courts may allocate a disproportionate part of that debt to Harry if Meghan can show that the expenses were mostly associated with his personal projects, international travel, and legal cases rather than their joint commercial endeavors. According to Bauer, this is not an accident. Starting in 2022, the spending pattern was designed to produce precisely that result. The word textbook was used by every counsel he spoke with to characterize it. All of the structures were complete by 2023. Meghan's name appeared first on every official document related to Archaea. The trademarks were registered, the corporate registrations were filed, the legal safeguards were locked into place, and she had the dominant legal authority over decision-making at the crucial moment. Harry, on the other hand, was in London. He was spending money on legal battles that his own team had warned would be financially disastrous, sitting in courtrooms disputing with judges, and crying in public. Bauer's sources posed a very unsettling question regarding this specific era. They questioned why Meghan persisted in supporting those legal disputes in the UK, even after Harry had been made fully aware of the financial risk by his attorneys. This was the response that his sources recommended. Once the divorce was filed, Harry would be solely responsible for those legal obligations under the terms of the prenuptial agreement. Meghan had no motive to intervene. She had every reason to allow him to continue. The fortification was created by Meghan. The assets had been secured by her. She had set up the obligations so they would fall on him. There was only one thing left to do at this point. Before anyone else could tell the story, she had to take control of it. She therefore called a company that she had previously collaborated with, and that was skilled at crafting a story. In the months prior to the public announcement of everything. And the last stage started as soon as the call was made. The final game. Meghan employed Sunshine Sachs again in January 2026. It appeared to be a standard corporate move at first glance. A famous person returning to a well-known public relations business. The kind of move that takes place in Hollywood on a weekly basis without much notice. However, those who are aware of the real workings of the high-profile divorce approach told Bauer that it is everything but standard. Unless the split has already been determined, you do not call in a crisis management company that specializes in separations. You bring them in 3 to 6 months prior to filing so that the public already has a version of events that portrays your husband as the issue and you as the victim by the time the papers are served. The narrative that endures is the one that was planted during those months prior to filing. It influences the framing of the custody dispute. Before a single court document is made public, it molds the audience's perceptions. The precise counsel Meghan purportedly obtained in late 2020 from a prominent Hollywood divorce lawyer, which influenced everything that transpired, has never been documented. Meghan was told, according to a source close to that lawyer, that the best approach to obtain a dominating legal position in a California divorce with a prominent celebrity husband was to position herself as the partnership's main business driver before any separation. California courts consider the company's founder. One spouse enters any asset dispute from a position of great strength if they can prove they were the creative force, the deal maker, the architect of the business, and the public face of the company. Every action Meghan took starting in 2022, including her solo filings, independent business endeavors, and choice to lead all public-facing media, was exactly in line with that advice. Regarding the legal timeline, Bauer was exact. A divorce petition must be filed after 6 months of residency under California family law. Meghan had lived in California permanently for several years. According to Bauer's sources, she might file within 6 months of January 2026. And everything that has been put together since 2020 will trigger all at once. On page 14, the intellectual property clause comes into effect. Meghan's asset structures from 2022 to 2023 are locked in. A California court will utilize the trademarks, corporate registrations, and financial flows diverted from jointly held corporations as the legal basis to decide who owns what. And Harry won't have nearly all of the defenses he believed he had when he enters that courtroom. The portion of the story that hits home the hardest is Bauer's portrayal of Harry during this whole time period, because it does not paint a picture of a weak or stupid man. It depicts a person who has been totally ruined. In ways that most people cannot fully comprehend. Harry was already broken when he joined this marriage. The royal family's answer to his mother's brutal death when he was 12 years old was to stifle his grief and teach him how to be composed in front of cameras. He was given a ceremonial function with no true identity or purpose, and he carried that harm for decades. People close to him told Bauer that his complete and profound need for outside approval was more akin to an open wound than a characteristic of his personality. Meghan was aware of that wound from the start and exploited it to control him. Former Kensington Palace employees told Bauer about a marriage in which Meghan had total control over Harry's information surroundings. The unsettling sensation of briefly connecting with him and then seeing him withdraw again within days, as if something had been said to him in private that altered his mind, was recounted by old friends who reached out. Everyone who could have resisted, posed a challenging query, or presented him with an alternative reality was eliminated. She was the only member of Harry's inner group by the time Megxit occurred. He was financially dependent on a woman whose exit strategy had been in place for years, and he was alone in a nation that was not his own. Bauer was told by former domestic workers about a marriage that had been breaking down in private long before any of it was visible in public. There were days of silence interspersed with shouts loud enough to be heard through closed doors. Harry did not act like a man with a safe home waiting for him in the London courtrooms, where he argued with judges and had open and honest breakdowns. That was the behavior of a man who was unable to identify the boundaries of something that was catastrophically wrong, even though he already knew it on a deep, silent level. According to many close to Harry, the custody aspect is the most disastrous of all. The current pattern of care at the time of filing is the main basis on which California family law courts determine custody agreements. For the past 3 years, Harry has been out of California for a considerable amount of time, attending Invictus events abroad and flying to the UK for court proceedings. Regardless of any private arrangement between them, Meghan has stayed in California and is actively involved in the children's everyday lives, acting as their primary caregiver in a practical sense. According to Bauer sources, Meghan's legal team will promptly submit records of Harry's absences as proof of her primary custody request when the divorce papers are filed. In the end, Bauer foresees more than just a divorce for Harry. It's a whole disassembly. The existing asset structures cause him to lose the Montecito home. The intellectual property provision he signed without reading causes him to lose the majority of ownership over Archwell and the Sussex brand. He is already losing the custody battle. Furthermore, according to the forward-looking language on page 14, she might have the majority of the rights for years to come to make money off of his own royal identity, write another book, and start another enterprise based on the narrative of who he really is. Harry gave up his brand, his name, his children's primary residence, and his financial future. Meghan put it in front of him, and he had no one left to warn him to stop, so he signed it at the most shattered and lonely moment of his adult life. The legal process will have already begun by the time Harry fully realizes the extent of what he gave away, and it will be too late to alter anything. That would have triggered the clause. The assets would have been kept apart. The world will already believe the version of events that Sunshine Sachs developed and seeded throughout the months before filing. And Harry, the guy who sacrificed all for a romantic tale, will be left with the ruins of a scheme he was unaware of.